Some years ago, I worked for a solar firm as a warehouse manager. I was in charge of their warehouse, which was located at the Kipapa Caves. The warehouse was 2 rented caves and the surrounding lots, which were fenced in. These caves were old military storage units dug into the gulch walls. The caves were about 200 foot deep, 20 wide and tall, reinforced with concrete. The solar firm stored their equipment and materials in the caves. The lots were where vehicles, heavy machinery, and a few 40-foot containers were held. I worked there with my driver. The caves had no electricity or plumbing, so a solar system and backup generator powered the caves, and a porta potty provided relief. Cell reception was spotty at best, so I would have to drive out to make cell calls. When I started working there, I had no information on the history of Kipapa Gulch. My work schedule was 6 a to 3 p. When I started work, a lot of times it was still dark, so when I got there, I had to power up the caves. If the batteries of the solar system didn't have enough juice, I'd have to power up the generator. I'd normally have to do this using only the light from my phone. It was pretty quiet at our units. The neighboring caves were quite a distance away, and they were primarily used as storage, so we really didn't see anybody around. Rarely a truck would pass by going up to the units further up the gulch. At first it was like any other workplace. Nothing out of the ordinary, but soon after I started to notice some weird happenings. The first thing I noticed that was weird was the dead animals. Walking around the site, I would find dead Jackson chameleons all over the place. They were just there on the ground dead. I figured cats were getting them, but I also noticed their carcasses were intact without damage. Looks like they just fell from the trees around the caves. There were also a lot of dead mongoose, myna birds, owls, pigeons, and ducks. All intact carcasses with no predatory marks like bites or scratches. Pretty weird, yeah? Now on to the really weird stuff. Every few days or so, I would hear banging coming from inside the containers. The containers were under lock and key. Every time I would hear the banging, I would have to unlock and open the containers and make sure nobody was inside. I would open the containers, find nobody or any animals inside. After a few weeks of this, I said F it and stopped checking. I figured the materials inside were adjusting to temperature changes. I'm okay. While working in the cave one day, walking to the back end, passing a certain spot, I smelled the strong scent of body odor. It was like I passed by very close to somebody. But nobody was there in the cave that day but me. I walked to the back of the cave, did what I needed to do back there, and proceeded to walk back to the front of the cave. As soon as got to the spot where I first smelled the bow, I again smelled the strong odor. Just as before, it seemed like I just passed by very close to somebody. I got to the entrance of the cave and quickly checked if I forgot to put deodorant on during my morning routine. But no, I did have my deodorant on. My mind playing tricks on me? I had a small desk set up at the entrance of the cave where I would work on a laptop. I would check emails from the office and do paperwork. Every so often, I would hear noises coming from the back of the caves. The noises were like something moving, and it sounded like something large, bigger than a mongoose or cat. At first, I would go back and check it out, but after quite a few times of finding nothing there, I said F it. I chalked it up to equipment adjusting to temperature changes. I'm okay again. One early morning, while it was still dark, before my driver left on his route, we heard a woman screaming coming from above the caves. The gulch walls were about 100 foot up, and the sounds came from up top. It sounded like domestics and went on for about 15 minutes. My driver and I figured there was a subdivision up there and a couple were having it out. A few weeks later, during a lull in work, my driver and I decided to drive up gulch and check out the other caves. We drove about a mile up the gulch and came to the last cave. From there, we could see our cave and what was directly above it. To our amazement, on the plateau above our cave, there was no subdivision, no houses, no roads, no nothing. Who was up there screaming? We had a lot of machinery, vehicles, electronics, mechanical equipment, solar systems, etc. Everything would seem to crap out, even our personal vehicles and property. We would have to call our technicians to come and repair the equipment and machinery. They were constantly there repairing stuff, but what was weird was a lot of times they would come down and find nothing wrong with the equipment, where all of a sudden the equipment started to work fine. After a while of this, we started to video ourselves starting up equipment so we could show them we were doing it correctly and the equipment in fact was not working before we called for repair. But this is creepiest thing that happened to me there. One day I loaded my driver up and he left for his route. I then had to go do my business. I went into the porta potty and locked to the door. Before I could do anything, the stall began to shake back and forth. I yelled out thinking my driver came back and was playing a joke on me. I unlocked the door, hopped out thinking I would find my driver laughing. But no one was there. I ran up to the cave to see if anybody was around, again nobody there. I called my driver, the call went through, and he was already on the freeway. He thought I was crazy after I told him what happened. After that I tried not to use the porta potty as much as I could. After a year there I was laid off due to a slump in the solar business. Only then I decided to seek out the history of that place. Look up the history of old Hawaii Kipapa Gulch and let me know what you think. By the way, one of the caves across from where our caves were is where the illegal fireworks disposal crew lost their lives. It is said that a crew member was smoking in the cave where they stored seized illegal fireworks. This story is bizarre as all hell. I still remember it clear as daylight. It was probably May 1st, 2005 in my hometown of Bumfuck Nowhere, Maine. I was 4 years old with my father walking around the May Day Festival. It's a small festival put on every year at the local high school with a bounce house, baked good, face painting, fire safety teachings, and one lone paramedic in case anything weird to transpire. A couple food vendors here and there. Now, this specific year they had a random clown doing balloon animals for all the kids. And I asked my father, "Will you get me one?" He looked over at the clown, smiling, then down at me. "Why don't you wait here for a moment, let me grab us some water and we can go together," he said, giving me a happy medium. I smiled up at him, but also being 4 and naive, I didn't listen. I marched my little legs over to the tall man. Probably 5 feet 11 inches, scrawny, had overalls with paint splatter, a red styrofoam nose, white base, and a big red smile with blue grease paint smudged haphazardly around his eyes. Long, scraggly hair that only came down from the side of his head, leaving a bald donut on top. I thought that's how all clowns looked. He had white gloves, stained in brown and deep mahogany colors. I thought paint, but who fucking knows at this stage? He was making a giraffe for a little boy before me, and I was too shy to interrupt, just kind of mesmerized. When he was done, I stepped forward very bashful and stuttered out a weak, "Excuse me, sir?" His head whipped over at me and his eyes stared almost through my soul. I could not see irises, just black pupils. I was about to ask him for a sword or something when he reached down so quick, grabbed my left wrist, yanked it up, and sank his teeth into my forearm. I was shrieking within a millisecond. The guy let go of me and darted off down the back exits of the high school. I had a giant bite mark outlining my arm. My father was by my side immediately. He looked up and saw the guy taking off down the road. He was mad but just picked me up and ran me over to the paramedics tent. There were cops called, people surrounding us at the tent trying to see my arm. In a small town like that, everyone has to be involved. This was pre-high quality cell phone days, so no one was filming this or anything, but plenty of my hometown residents saw it. All horrified. Everyone who saw had to give a statement to the cops, including me and my father. After all these years, my father told me the event coordinators came up to him after my mom picked me up and said they never hired a clown for entertainment, nor did the cops ever find the guy. They told my dad it was probably some drugged-up junkie having a bad trip and took it out on me. My hometown has one of the worst drug epidemics in the state, so it would not surprise me. Irony of this whole story, my mom sent me to circus school when I was in middle school, and she also started an animal-free circus made entirely of puppets. You could say I now have clown DNA. This is actually my mom's story and will be told from her personal account. Though this isn't exactly a let's not meet story, since the villain of the story is deceased and never technically met any of the characters before he became so, but even so, he is a man that I'm sure everyone involved wished they had never had the displeasure to cross paths with. It was early December in 2005. My brother, Alex, and his wife's fourth child had just started first grade, so with her having full days of school, they had more time to pick up some extra hours and try to get ready for Christmas. All he could find at the time is work with companies where he would drive a work truck to different counties in our state, making deliveries between businesses that weren't worth getting a big semi-truck for. After the big snowstorm we had in '99 that trapped us all at home for weeks, none of us liked the idea of him being on that road, but you know your uncle. He couldn't stand the idea of having nothing under the tree on Christmas. I didn't even want to go with him. When he asked me, I had the worst feeling about it, but the weather channels all said the storm wouldn't last, and I was the only one out of us that had a cell phone, so I couldn't just let him go out there alone. If something happened and he froze to death because he couldn't call for help, I don't know I would be able to live with myself. So I dropped you off at your aunt's house and told your father I'd be back in a few days. That was it. That was the start of it all. A route he'd done 100 times up to that point, but the Weather Channel was wrong. By the time we were nearing the Vermont border and all those mountains came up, every single one of them didn't have a speck of color on them. Everything around us was white. There were points when all we could do was follow the tire tracks on the road from vehicles in front of us and hope they didn't go off the road for us to follow. We were starting to lose the light by the time we were closing in on Burlington, Vermont, and we figured that would be as good a place as any to spend the night. I hate cities, but driving those roads in the dark wasn't an option. We only had to travel through the back way to Montpelier, and then it was smooth sailing on the interstate right into Burlington. In the morning, we could reassess our route and cut through to New Hampshire and from there toward the city. I remember we filled up at a gas station, and it was so cold that when we brought our coffees to the van, it didn't even burn our mouths to drink it. Nothing but ice out there, but we were sure we could make it to the interstate and then the roads would be clear, so we kept going even though we felt off about it. We were talking about what we were getting you kids for Christmas and where we'd be getting together to have Christmas dinner that year when we hit the mountain. I said to him we should turn around and go back. This isn't safe. For a minute I thought he'd listen, but then he shifted the gear on the van and said, "Go back to what?" He was right. We hadn't seen anything since we got our coffees, and they were stone cold by then. It was actually okay for a while. We were following another car stuck behind a plow, so safest place to be at that time, or so we thought. The next bit is always a bit hazy for me. We saw the snow plow jerk toward the edge of the mountainside, and we were so afraid of him going through the bars and off the side of the mountain. I didn't even consider what he was jerking away from until I heard Alex yell. I was watching the snow plow trying to right itself and keep itself on the road, and I didn't even have time to look out the windshield to see what he was yelling about before the car in front of us hit us. When everything stopped moving, my coffee was everywhere. All over me, the windshield, my phone, everything. My chest was on fire and my legs felt like they'd been hit by a car. I checked my phone first thing, but no good, it was gone. So much for calling for help. The next thing I checked was my brother. His mouth was bleeding and his eyes were closed. But when I said his name and shook him, he groaned, so at least I knew he was alive. All I could see in front of us was ice and rock, so I had no idea what the other driver's states were. but I had to get to a phone and get help, so I told him to stay put and got out of the car. Of course, he didn't listen to me because he never does. So before I could even register what I was looking at, he was behind me calling my name and telling me not to leave him. In front of us was this large work truck, and flat as a pancake right in the front of it was the car in front of us. I couldn't move. They had to be dead. No one could have survived that. But Alex ran the best he could, holding his chest and stumbling around the car and pried open the passenger door to the truck. I finally got out of my daze when he told me to stay away from the truck, and my heart sank. Was everyone dead? Were we the only ones who survived? That's the day I realized that hell wasn't a place. Being all alone on that mountain, surrounded by metal, rocks, freezing cold wind, ice, and dead bodies, with no way to get help and miles away from anyone or anything. That was the worst feeling I've ever experienced. There was another vehicle that wasn't there, though, someone who might be alive. The snowplow was gone. There was a big dent in the guardrails and we couldn't see him, so he left us to go get help. What else could we think? No one that's not pure evil could see what we saw and not stay to help unless they knew they needed to get the police. I was about to mention the snowplow when he finally got the door open, only to find himself up to his ankles in trash. He didn't hesitate though. He was going for the radio and climbed into the truck where I couldn't see him. I panicked, even him just being out of sight. I couldn't stand being alone up there, so I ran to the truck, despite knowing what I'd find, but I had to stop before I got to the door anyway. It smelled like a brewery mixed with pennies. I knew that smell. Enough alcoholics are in our family to know that smell. Alex cursed and tumbled back out of the truck, and I went to him to help him up, trying to ignore the fresh blood on his clothes and the ever stronger smell of alcohol and blood filling my nose coming from the now open door. Radio's dead. Thing won't even start. He snarled, gripping his chest again. I started to tell him my thoughts on the plow when we heard a horrible scream that made us both flinch away from the panic behind it. I practically dropped Alex on the ground, racing back around to the front of the truck to the car, and inside was a young girl. She was beautiful, brown hair with blonde highlights, a Lilo and Stitch shirt, and the most beautiful blue eyes I'd ever seen that were filled with tears and terror. She was confused and screaming in between words, reaching out to me, and I grabbed her hands. Alex, in a rush to get to me and get me away from the scene, crashed into me, and she cried out when my hands were pulled from hers, but I was right back to the window in seconds with her, pushing him off me. "We'll get you out, honey, I promise." I turned on Alex. As he tugged on me again, he had to have some sort of idea, right? He could get her. One door was already pried open, we could do another. But his eyes were gigantic when he looked at me, and he wouldn't say a word. Coming from a guy who has never shut up since the day he was born, I met his eyes, then followed where he led my gaze to, and a fresh set of tears sprung on me all over again. Right underneath the feet of Stitch on her shirt and the bit of her stomach that was showing with how she was sitting, there was only solid metal. The rest of her couldn't even be seen. She didn't seem to understand what happened to make me react like that, and started panicking when she followed our eyes. Realizing what we did, she began panicking all over again, begging us to tell her where her legs were. So I shushed her, holding her hands tight and promising her that she'd be okay, that help was coming and they'd get her out. I don't know how long I stood there. Alex eventually went back to the truck and in the mostly undamaged back of ours to see if he could find anything to help fight off the cold. While we waited, but there wasn't much. He even searched the area and the trash that fell out of Drunk Man's truck. But no luck there, either. I gave her my jacket after we put on every piece of clothing that we brought with us for the trip. She was getting cold though, and her voice was getting weaker, more quiet. It was completely dark by then. All we could see was what the snow led us and our flashlights that would run out of battery eventually. Alex tried to convince me to get back into our vehicle, to get out of the wind, but I just couldn't leave her. When I looked into her eyes, all I could see was you when you got that age. One day, she wasn't even 20 yet, trying to get home for Christmas. She told me about her family, about college and her life up to that point, and her asshole boyfriend that was supposed to come with her but canceled at the last minute to spend the holidays with his friends instead. She decided before the end that it was a good thing, though. She said he was a good man and he didn't deserve to die like this too. She was much more calm by this point, not even acknowledging the fact that she was practically in half. I think deep down she knew she wasn't going home and needed someone to listen to her as she tried to make sense of how this could be how her life was going to end. She kept mentioning how cold it was getting, but as soon as Alex noticed me removing my layers of clothing to give to her, he scolded me, demanding that I keep as bundled up as possible. He told me that she was already dead, and we're the ones who needed the warmth, not her. I knew he was right, but I cursed him anyway, shoving him away from her. Even if she too knew he was right, he didn't need to say that in front of her. She had even grown quiet after some time, us giving each other assurances that everything would be okay, instead of the conversation of before. By that time, I was struggling against the cold, even with Alex hugging me, trying to keep the wind on his back and off from me, when we heard sirens in the distance. My brother and I looked at each other and, without even saying anything or showing any emotion, he staggered and limped as fast as he could toward them, holding the flashlight over his head and waving it. He couldn't yell without devolving into coughs and spitting up more blood, but, gritting his teeth against the pain, hand on his chest, he waved the light all over the road toward the sirens, eventually seeing the lights of police, firefighters, and ambulances. I told her that they were coming, that they'd help her and this was all over, but she didn't react. She gave me a sad smile and it broke my heart into a million pieces. I knew that she knew by then that she wasn't going to make it, but seeing the acceptance, mixed in with the fear on her face and hearing how thankful she was that I was with her and how lucky my daughter was to have me in her life, was more than I could take. I let go of her hand and did what my brother couldn't. I stood and jumped, waving the flashlight over my head, screaming that we needed the ambulance over here, that she needs help. They listened and rushed over as fast as they could, but Alex was right, there was no helping her. She got to call her mother on one of the EMT's phone and tell her she loved her, along with some other messages to her other family. Then they moved her to try to get her out, and that was it. They took me away into the ambulance after they ensured her pulse had stopped. She was dead, the drunk guy was dead, my brother could be dying for all I knew, and none of it felt real. My brother and I were allowed to ride in an ambulance together. It was against protocol, but given what we just went through and how devastated I was, they allowed it. I think Alex would have attacked them if they tried to separate him from me at that point. Regardless, he wasn't letting me out of his sight until we were in a building with heat and off that fucking mountain. Once we got to the hospital, they took him away, and I was alone, so I called your father, told him where I was and the gist of what happened. Then I called your aunt, told her even less of what happened and that I would call her the second I heard anything about Alex, and she had to wake you up since it was almost 3 in the morning, but I had to hear your voice. Now it's 2021, and when it's cold outside my skin burns as if it's being stabbed by heated needles. Alex had so much blood in his lung by the time that they came that he still has problems with breathing. We both had broken ribs that healed, and the surgery I had to get later on my legs went fine. It's 2021 and we're alive. We got to come home and have Christmas and all the Christmases since then, and I saw you grow up to be the age of that poor girl and then surpass her. I never went to her funeral or met with her family. I've always regretted that. These days, I don't even remember her voice, her family's names. I don't remember what school she went to or where exactly her boyfriend went for Christmas instead of going home with her. I don't remember how her hands felt or the smell of her shampoo in her hair. Hell, most of the time it doesn't even feel like she was a real person, like it was a horrible dream or something that happened to someone else. But that smile she gave me at the end, how she knew it was over, but was too scared to actually say it. How one of her last acts was to reassure me that she knew that she was going to die and that it was going to all be okay. Just like we said, that I will never forget.